Hey everybody, this is John Rood from Perceptual. I'm here with Jeremy. And Jeremy, if you'd like to give short introductions to who you are, and we'll get kicked off.
Sure. Great to be here. I'm Jeremy Schiff, the CEO and founder of RecruitBot, which is a recruiting and sourcing automation software.
Awesome. So we're going to spend probably 20 to 30 minutes talking today. And Jeremy, I would love it if you could just start by sharing with our audience, like, how did you get into this? Like, what's your background in AI and machine learning, and how did you get the idea for RecruitBot specifically?
Yeah, so I've always been the sort of person that sort of like finds the nails that are interesting and then finds the right hammer for them. But I started out my career coming up with as basically as many different hammers as I could sort of acquire. And so I started out my career getting doing my undergrad and PhD in applied machine learning at Berkeley. While I was there, I started a company that was an online photo editor. So think of it as like Instagram for the web a couple years earlier. So we powered companies like MySpace and PhotoBucket. We were one of the major photo editors on Facebook. And we grew to, I think, about 50 million people using us every month, which was pretty crazy. And then my second company was I worked with a number of people on personalized restaurant recommendations. So think of sort of Netflix's recommend me a movie, but instead it's recommend me a restaurant on top of all of Yelp's data. And eventually we sold that company to OpenTable, where I was running machine learning and data science there. And I was trying to hire some great machine learning and data science people. And it turns out it's very hard to hire those people, especially at scale. And so I ended up working a lot with the recruiting organization, finding interesting ways to go and innovate and get those sorts of people to have a conversation with us. And I found that I could generally be pretty compelling to get people to join, but I still needed conversations to happen in the first place. And using LinkedIn was a very sort of, it's a very powerful tool, but it also can be sort of very slow and time consuming in order to go and engage with people. And especially with some sorts of people like engineers, they're really not sort of checking LinkedIn very often anyways. And so after I left OpenTable, I took a little bit of time to travel, and I came back, and I was still just very focused on this challenge that I had run into at OpenTable, and I was just like, there's got to be a better way. And so this really came out of RecruitBot. Ultimately came out of a pain point that I experienced myself, which was, how do I build a team of extraordinary people with tools that will allow me to target the right people much more quickly and much more effectively than sort of was available before. And so that's what we've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years.
Gotcha. Okay. Can you talk a little bit about how, I guess I would first start with, what does RecruitBot do? And then love to kind of get into the details for our audience who I think is curious about like the kind of like the new set of machine learning and AI driven tools. They want to know how they work. So love to hear like, what does it do? And then as much as you can tell us about like the back end and how it's trained, like how it works, like all that stuff would be super helpful.
For sure. So yeah, just from a high level, RecruitBot is a passive outreach tool. So what that means is we're trying to engage with candidates who have jobs or definitely aren't raising up their hand and saying, I'm looking for a job, aren't applying, etc. And a lot of the sort of top tier people in their fields, they never really apply for a job. They just sort of get grumpy with the position they're in. And 4 headhunters happen to be sort of poking at them at the right time, and they end up sort of going and interviewing and joining somewhere else. And so RecruitBot's entire thesis is, how do we identify and engage with those people in a much more effective and scalable way? So there are 3 major parts to sort of getting in contact with those people, which we call find, engage, and optimize. So when we're trying to find candidates, we have a database of about 650 million people, which we get by crawling the entire internet. And we can then search by those, all sorts of different criteria: job title, years of experience, education, skills, including stuff that you wouldn't even necessarily find in a profile. So for example, we use a little bit of sort of smart AI and machine learning to predict if someone's likely to be a woman or African-American or Latinx. So I can now start sourcing for DEI from a huge pool of candidates that I wouldn't be able to do normally. Once I've found that pool of candidates, I then need to shortlist them. So I need to take, I don't know, 8,000 senior SaaS people in Austin, and I need to go and find the 50 that are the best fit for my business. And the system sort of informed a little bit by Netflix and how you used to like star movies, as I was sort of talking about a little bit previous in my career. You literally star candidates on a 1 to 5 star scale. So 1 means this candidate isn't a good fit, and 5 means this candidate's a perfect fit for what I'm looking for. And then the machine learning is going to work out what's in common with the candidates that I like and different than the candidates that I don't like. So it might be job title, or it might be job titles, it might be pedigree, it might be specific skills, it may even be as detailed as like action words or ownership words or leadership words, depending on what it is that the hiring manager cares about or the recruiter cares about. And this is a really big deal and is sort of the big difference between what a lot of people talk about with AI versus machine learning, which is really personalized, which hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about. After we've sort of gotten that list of, let's say, 50 great people, then I can quickly review those people, find the ones that I like the most out of that short list. That now the system's done a great job of prioritizing the people. I just have to review a much shorter list. Typically, we find that we're 5 times more effective than LinkedIn. So 1 out of every 10 candidates on LinkedIn from our sort of internal testing was relevant, and 1 out of 2 on RecruitBot was relevant after the machine learning was trained. And so that's going to save you a ton of time, right? If I tell you you're going to have to read 5 times fewer resumes to find great candidates, that's really exciting. So once I found the people, then I would want to engage with them. So we run automated email campaigns, provide emails. We're soon going to be providing phone numbers. We can run up so it'll email, it'll automatically follow up, it'll automatically personalize those messages. It'll automatically stop and alert you once a candidate has responded. So I can just sort of set it and forget it. So like in the old days, I had to set a reminder, hey, I emailed this person, remind me 4 days later to follow up with them if they haven't responded. That all can happen automatically through our email system. And then we have analytics to understand open rates and response rates and all of those sorts of things. And so what's nice about that is I can understand what's working and what isn't. And so I can say, oh, Sue's message is twice as effective as Bob's, so I want to really double down on Sue's. So the major theme here is that a lot of recruiting is thought of as a funnel today, where I sort of start with a set of candidates. I find candidates, I push them through the funnel, I find the ones that are relevant, I interview them, and then I sort of go back and do it again. But when I go back and do it again a second time, it's completely sort of from scratch, other than I can't reach out to the people that I reached out to before. But if you leverage something like RecruitBot, every part of the system is getting smarter. And so we like to call it the recruiting flywheel. So the idea is effectively, as I'm engaging with candidates, the system's getting smarter about who to target. So I spend less time targeting people in the future. As I'm reaching out to candidates, I get all sorts of data about which messages are more compelling. So I can use the more compelling messages to improve response rates over time. So eventually I'm spending a lot less time finding candidates, and and my hit rate of the number of people I have to message to get to have a conversation with me goes way up, which ultimately allows me to dramatically change the number of candidates that I can engage with at scale.
Gotcha. Okay. I think that makes sense. So I've got a lot of questions about that great overview that you gave. First of all, let's talk about the data scraping part. So in the beginning, where you've got this list of tons of people, where does it come from?
Yeah, so we're just basically crawling the web. So we're getting data from basically any sort of public information that we can find. And then we're also buying data from private data partners and folding that into sort of a super profile. So just information from anywhere on the open web that we can go and find.
Gotcha. Does that include data from LinkedIn? Is that part of your process?
We don't really talk about sort of specific providers that we're going and getting from, but we do go and crawl a vast majority of the internet to go and sort of get that. And so the sort of follow-up question of are a lot of like people who on LinkedIn exist in RecruitBot? The answer to that is like obviously yes. If we have 650 million people, there's a lot of overlap between our data set and LinkedIn's data set.
Gotcha. Okay. I think that makes sense. And then you talked about that training process. You talked about kind of like as the starring that you would do on Netflix or whatever. So I want to understand, does that mean that there's there's hiring manager who gets kind of gets this first batch of data and then has to go and then goes through and kind of manually gives the stars or thumbs up or thumbs down or whatever?
So the stakeholder dramatically, like, there's sort of a running joke, which is like two recruiters, three processes. Like, they're like, it's amazing how many different ways organizations sort of set up when the hiring and manager is involved, when the recruiter is involved.
Mhm,
But ultimately, there's some stakeholder who's making an initial decision,
mhm,
and there might be a secondary stakeholder who's sort of approving or not approving. So sometimes a recruiter just goes and says, I'm going to go and find you great candidates, and the hiring manager is just interviewing. Sometimes the hiring manager is actually going and searching for the candidates first.
mhm.
Sometimes the recruiter is coming up with a batch of candidates and then saying, hey, why don't you go and validate these and make sure that I'm on the right track? But we support all of those use cases. And what's important and different is it's actually really hard to do that today. So like when we spoke to most recruiters about how they do it, they literally have a Google sheet and a bunch of LinkedIn URLs, and they send it to the hiring manager and they say, fill in this thing, and then we'll have a 1 hour meeting synchronously and try and get on the same page.
Mhm.
And so what's nice is because the hiring manager and the recruiter can collaborate in RecruitBot, it allows the hiring manager to build a lot more empathy about, like, hey, I'm actually asking for a spotted unicorn. Like, the number of times we've been on a call where the hiring manager and recruiter are going on a demo, and the recruiter types in the search and then they type in PhD, and the number of candidates drops from 5,000 to 50.
Mhm.
And the hiring manager is like, oh, yeah, that's just sort of like a soft requirement. That's not a big deal. Like, we should definitely go after the 5,000, not just the 50. And you can watch the recruiter try and reach through the screen and strangle the hiring manager because for the last 3 months, they've been trying to convince them of exactly that.
Yeah.
So building the empathy where the hiring manager and recruiter are actually using the tools together can be really a great benefit.
Mhm.
But also it means that the machine learning is sort of turbocharging all of those decisions, right? So if a hiring manager goes in and rates 30 or 40 candidates, the machine learning is going to predict how that person is going to make judgments across the entire data set, which can be really valuable for the recruiter because now they can sort of get a good idea of what the hiring manager might be looking for in a much more asynchronous way without having to do all of the check-in meetings and ultimately dramatically reducing your time to fill candidates and hiring them.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. You had made reference previously in our discussion to the distinction between machine learning and AI. Can you talk about what that means to you?
Yeah, so I mean, fundamentally, AI is sort of a more general term, and machine learning is a more specific term. But in the HR world, there's a lot of just marketing speak about AI. I feel like you go like there. I don't know of any product that exists in HR today that doesn't have some sort of AI that they're talking about. But the big difference between AI and machine learning is that most people, when they say AI, they mean it in a sort of actually more general, sort of like 1990s AI sense,
Mhm.
where let's say that I'm getting a set of results when I'm typing into a search engine. Some engineer has basically decided, well, job title is more important than skills, or vice versa. Now, some hiring managers may care more about job titles, and others may sort of care about skills. But with an AI system, the AI is giving the exact same results to absolutely everyone
Mhm.
based on what they're deciding. And most
Okay.
of the time, when people talk about AI in search, that's what they mean. Machine learning, on the other hand, as sort of was example with like the Netflix and the Open Table that I was saying before, is really focused on personalization. So you're going to get much better results if I'm curating the list based on what it is that you specifically are looking for. And so, like, why is there such a large gap between like that 5x number that I was saying before? And it's because I'm personalizing it to the specific needs and tastes of an individual organization, as opposed to having to give the most general, sort of like best feedback that I can, and relying on the user to go and sort of know the magical search terms to type into
Mhm.
in order to get their list small enough to have a reasonable set to engage with, but big enough that they're not going to run out of candidates. And that tension between big and small is sort of like a classic machine learning problem,
Mhm.
where the goal is like you don't solve it by making the group bigger or smaller. You come up with a large group and then you worry about reordering those candidates based on who's the most promising. And so by leveraging the machine learning that's going to personalize it to what you're looking for, you're ultimately going to spend a lot less time as opposed to conventional AI where you're getting the same results as everyone else.
Gotcha. Okay. I think that makes sense. So let's put on kind of like our safety and fairness and anti-bias glasses for a little bit. I know that's something that's important to RecruitBot, so it's exciting to talk about. As we think about that, that process. So the hiring manager stars the candidates they want, and then the machine learning algorithm makes the different connections, starts to make recommendations. How do you know in your system that it's making recommendations based on things that feel virtuous, like, years of experience or certifications, versus making decisions based on, protected class or socioeconomic status or whatever that might be?
For sure, it's a great question. And the short answer is you need to think about these things from the ground up.
Mhm.
And so, like, if you think about the systems, I mean, actually, one of the early systems when we were starting to build RecruitBot, Amazon had this pretty famous faux pas where they tossed every one of their engineers into a machine learning algorithm. We actually talk about it a little on our blog, and they ended up building a white man detector. And like, because that was the most common attribute about all of their engineers, because they had a lot of engineers that were quite different, but they were all white men, and so that was the thing that it sort of found in common. And so, you can be a lot more thoughtful about it. But to start with, you just need to acknowledge that recruiting innately is a biased thing. You have to rely on some signals to say these candidates are likely to be a better fit for this position than these other candidates. Otherwise, I should just unilaterally read it. Like, I should interview absolutely everyone who applies with their resume. And like, obviously that doesn't make sense. And so if you're going to have bias, then the point is it's not about having no bias. It's about having a lot less bias than the humans are going to have on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like to use a metaphor of like self-driving cars, which is like, it's not that they can't crash. As long as they crash a lot less often than when you and I are behind the wheel, then it makes sense for autonomous cars to start being on the road. And until they are, it doesn't make sense for that at all. And so similarly, in the bias question, it's how do we dramatically reduce bias relative to sort of the average person? And so there's simple things that you can do, like making sure we're not looking at the name or the location or the photo or all sorts of things in order to strip away a lot of the sort of first degree bias that would be in there. And it turns out that goes a long way because like humans sort of innately rely on that. I still remember one of the early days, we had a customer say, can you add photos of people on RecruitBot? Because I know what a smart person looks like. And if I don't have the photo, then I can't go and do that. And I made that exact same face because like that we don't have photos of RecruitBot because that shouldn't be something you're using to evaluate whether or not a candidate is a good fit. And so similarly, the machine learning algorithms are really focused on sort of skills and experience and things like leadership words or like classes of things like that, as opposed to name and photo and things like that. We have analytics to understand sort of how effective, like, again, you can literally check a box and say, I want to see if these are women or African American. So you can understand how biased your search is just by turning on and off that toggle as well. But that also means that you can sort of fight against bias. So what's nice about that is if your pipeline, let's say you have a sales organization that doesn't have enough women in it, it's very important that anyone you're interviewing is held to the exact same standard and is interviewed exactly the same way. Mm-hmm. But it's totally appropriate to try and enhance the funnel in terms of, hey, we don't have enough women applying to this specific sales job. I want to go and find and reach out to them. And so RecruitBot sort of enables people to go and find and engage with those people and segment them. So you might imagine that instead of reaching out from one specific person in the organization, maybe there's a female sales manager and you want to reach out to candidates on behalf of that person because you can sort of put your foot forward that you care about an inclusive and diverse work environment. And so you can sort of do both the yin and the yang, which is if you're smart about the machine learning, you can reduce bias, but you can also use machine learning to help empower people to fight against just even little natural biases like who's applying to your company.
Gotcha. Okay. So going back to there's a set of attributes that we want the algorithm to not look at, basically. Is there is there like explicitly like a set of things where you say you program the algorithm like do not look at these factors?
Yes. I mean, they're explicit. Like, we basically have lots of structured data about candidates. And yeah, I mean, I gave two as very simple examples of like, You don't look at the name and you don't look at the location because those aren't relevant when you're making your hire.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. I think it makes sense. It's a great explanation of what the product does. I'd love just for from where you sit, if you talk a little bit about where do you see the industry going? So everyone, I mean, obviously everyone's now talking about, generative AI and how that's going to have an impact. What do you see for the next kind of 2 to 3 years of HR and AI?
Yeah, so there's a lot of good news, I think, for HR. I think initially, I still think that there are two camps, but I'm sort of staunchly in one, which is AI's coming for your job and you may as well find another one, but AI is coming for every job now. So I think as a CEO, I probably should find another job too. Um, or these tools are just going to start removing certain tasks that were um, sort of very simple and repetitive and are going to allow us to be more sophisticated about how we're thinking about things. So even a simple one in RecruitBot would be, I don't need to manually set a reminder and go and follow up with candidates. The system can automatically find them. Or I don't need to review resumes until my eyes bleed. Now the system can go and find the candidates that are most relevant to save me a bunch of time and effort. And so I do see AI sort of helping pepper a lot of those sorts of sub problems, helping me target better candidates, helping me write more compelling emails, helping me follow up with people more effectively, and helping me make sense of all of that information. And so what I am expecting to happen, though, which we're already seeing, is there's a fair amount of consolidation. So there's a lot of companies where one thing that is different about RecruitBot is we focus on the entire sourcing funnel from finding the people all the way to engaging. A lot of our sort of other players in the field are like, all we do is sourcing, or all we do is recruiting, or all we do is engaging. And it's getting exhausting for recruiters when they have to be in 7 different tools to do their job every day. And so AI will allow for a lot of this, especially this non-structured information, to be sort of more seamlessly reasoned about, which will allow providers like us to build tools faster that can sort of solve the entire problem, sort of beginning to end. That said, I do think it's like important to keep a pulse on like ChatGPT and all of those sorts of direct things of where things are going. I think people are very excited about the power, and I think they should be. But there's also all sorts of areas where things go wrong, right? So like ChatGPT, at least from my experience, ChatGPT and these sort of technologies seem to be very good at generating sort of initial ideas, but often require quite a bit of refinement. And that might be iterating with ChatGPT, that might be editing their results, so on and so forth. And just like most other AI that we deal with, there's always an interplay between the human and sort of the AI. And I think the thing that's most different about sort of ChatGPT is that you can clarify what you're looking for in a way that you're not normally able to, right? Normally, if I type something into Google and then I say, find me 50 great SaaS tech companies to go and reach out to, and it does, and you're like, no, I meant small SaaS companies. I didn't mean big SaaS companies. It's easier to go and sort of have a conversation. And I think that interaction is something that we're going to start seeing a lot more inside of AI, as opposed to sort of one and done. Like I just say that this is what I'm looking for, give me this thing, or here's this task, do it. So I think it's going to be a lot more the human and the AI sort of refining the work product together in the same way that you might with a consultant, right? Like when I sit down, I'm not a great designer, but when I sit down with my designer, I'm like, great, this is the first version. Hey, can you tweak this? Can you change that? And it'll suggest things too, right? It'll be like, hey, we shouldn't approach it this way. We should approach it that way because this is what you're trying to get to. And so the first level will just be sort of similar, but you could imagine eventually these AIs being like, I think what you're trying to do is this. Are you interested in this better way, or do you want to stay on your current path? So that's where I think it gets really interesting, is where it can start suggesting things as well as it can start evaluating the likelihood that something's good, right? So one of the main problems with ChatGPT is, and there's some interesting things with AutoGPT and things that people are sort of evaluating now, is how can I assess whether, first of all, how can I break down a problem into sub-problems so that these sorts of technologies can be more effective? But secondly, how can I evaluate that sort of the information that I have or the work product that I've produced is good? And I think that's where it's going to get really interesting. And I think that's also where it's sort of harder, because good has very different definitions, right? I mean, even thinking like if I ask for a news article, well, my political bias is probably going to affect a lot whether or not I think this article is good or not.
Right.
And so I think even the notion of good is going to become personalized in a way where, ironically, the same distinction we had at the beginning about AI versus machine learning, the sort of everyone's getting the same results versus everyone's getting personalized results. I expect the same thing's going to happen with this Chat GPT products, where one of the first things you're going to do is you're going to say, here's my identity, slurp up everything you need to know about me. Now start answering questions based on the context you have about me and what I care about, as opposed to giving me a generic answer that's the same for everyone, which is what you see right now with these technologies, is the answers are pretty darn good, but like they're very generic. And so people are now like, pretend you're this persona in order to
Yeah.
try and get there. But again, all of this is just scratching the surface, and I'm excited to see where it goes. And I'm excited. We're already kicking around some Chat GPT stuff internally that hopefully we'll release pretty soon.
Nice. That's awesome. Jeremy, thanks so much for joining us. I assume that people can find you and your company at recruitbot.com. Is that the right place?
Yeah, just come to recruitbot.com and yeah, happy to chat with anyone who might be interested in learning more. And even if people are just curious, feel free to fill in the form, and we're always happy to just chat and be very consultative about what it is that people are trying to achieve.
Nice. We will put the link down below so people can find you. And thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Sean. This has been great.